Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Mastered How to Edit Seals Part 13. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Sweat ran down his neck, where it was hidden by a long ponytail of blonde hair, and into his shirt. If he kept going, the people behind him would start to wonder why his shirt was so wet. He never lost his cool, but they didn't know what he did, and even if they did, it wouldn't have affected them nearly as much as it did him. They couldn't possibly know how important the information he had gotten was or how it could affect his whole clan. The only thing that could be considered to have gone somewhat right was that he got the information, even though he might have preferred to stay in the dark. If things had gone any worse, he would have been in this situation and wouldn't have known it, but at least he wouldn't be worried about it. At least no one was caught in the end, which made it less likely that things would keep going horribly wrong. Even though he didn't know for sure if they had killed anyone, the fact that they had already started killing their captive made him nervous. However, if the bodies were destroyed, it was possible that no one would make the connection between the spies and his clan. On the other hand, that just seemed like a wish. It was a fact that bad things were going to happen to him because good things were going to happen to the boy. The gods above knew that the former Uzumaki prince's sister luck was on his side. But the things he did didn't help at all in that way. Sending spies had been a risky thing to do, to be sure. His clan already didn't get along well with the wolves, and sending spies to their new country didn't help. On the other hand, he knew the wolves well enough that he couldn't find a reason not to send them. Even though it cost more to get than it was worth, the information that was brought back to him was still important. Some of which he would use as soon as he could to try to keep the wolves from getting back at him if they found out who was really to blame for the deaths or serious injuries of several of them. Even if the Yamanaka clan wasn't the one who did it, Konoha was probably involved in some way, which was close enough for him to worry about. He really should have gotten some foreign headbands, or at least had the spies scratch their own for the mission and gotten them replacements later. At this point, two of them had to be killed anyway, so there was no reason to doubt that they had gone rogue instead of dying as spies on their clan leader's orders. He didn't want to even think about what Kushina might do if she found out. That would be the worst thing ever. Sume would need to know about this, though. He didn't think he could blackmail the woman, since that would almost certainly let the wolves know that his clan was involved, but he could start making things better between the two clans. As much as he could, at least. He didn't have much control over things anymore, but at least Kushina was suffering because of it. She wanted to join the clan. The responsibility and power that came with it. Okay, but she also had to deal with the less pleasant parts of being in charge. If she only cared about the Yamanaka clan, she would be fine. His daughter, who was still in charge of the clan, though at a much lower level after Kushina took over, would have made sure of that, but she was also trying to bring back her own clan, which had been dying. It did weigh a lot, but most of that weight had already gone to the grave. It would take a lot of work to get it out again. If she wanted to bring back her ancestors' clan, she would have to give up his clan, which everyone knew wasn't going to happen. It was more likely that she would try to use his clan to save her own, but both of them would end up dead. Okay, that was a little sad, but he didn't like the idea of someone else running his clan. It just didn't feel right. Now, he could accept it if she was the Kushina he remembered, but the death of her son had hurt her a lot. She could hear about what he was doing and sometimes see him from a distance, but that didn't help. If anything, it made her want to get back what she had lost even more. Even though her desperation caused her to lose her son, it also kept him from her. And the more he moved away, the more desperate she got. Sadly, that way of thinking didn't make him a good leader of anything, let alone his clan. At this point, though, there wasn't much he could do about it. At least, he could do a lot of things by himself. At least for that reason, the information that was brought back to him was very helpful. Inuzuka in Wave. Since they were working with the wolves, he had to work with them as well. It wasn't the best way to protect himself, and it wouldn't help much if the wolves found out about his spies and got mad at him, but it was his best chance of success and, more importantly, of making his plan pay off. If he was really lucky, they might be able to get his clan back for him, but that was unlikely. But he wasn't the type to turn down a gift. The Inuzuka were allies with the wolves, and he had been looking for a way to make his clan's relationship with the wolves less violent than it had been in the past. Taking that step was a pretty obvious thing for him to do. Even though Nami no Kuni was still bothering him, he couldn't let it stop him from trying to make things right for his clan. So much had changed, and so much had been lost. They needed stability so they could get back to where they used to be, and that couldn't happen without help from outside. And since Kushina was busy taking care of her son, the Yamanaka could only get so much out of being their vassals. The money was nice, don't get him wrong. It helped fix a lot of the damage done by the angry wolves, but it could only do so much to keep their clan stable when it came from the outside and could stop at any time. They had to be able to stand on their own, but that was hard to do when Kushina and the Uzumaki saw them lying there with broken legs because they made a bad choice to go against her son and decided to cut them off. Too bad, because Naruto was about to help them up and give them the care they needed to get back to where they were before. Now, if they couldn't find someone to help them grow their legs back, they would always be crippled as long as the Uzumaki lived. Even though that might not last too long, there was also a pretty good chance that the Uzumaki would also die. Obviously, he knew more than just how the wolves in the Inuzuka were connected. He had heard that there was another village in the area called Sound. There was a good chance that they were building an outpost to make Nami no Kuni safer, but even if they were just there on a job, Wave might have a good relationship with the small shinobi village. So, if they needed to get away from Kushina's control, they could always do that. The clan would be pretty upset, and it wasn't the best idea, but at this point, they didn't have much to lose. One could argue about their status, but at this point, it was a damn joke, and everyone in the clan knew it. They were servants of a small clan with only 2 members. They were not a major clan in Konoha. It was terrible. Even though that clan was more important than all the others combined, he didn't care. The fact that they weren't even considered a full clan hurt their pride. Yes, it was their pride. It was pretty much the only thing they had left, and even it was getting old. He thought it was almost funny that it had to end this way, since pride had led them to this point. The problem began when his daughter's pride in their family clashed with Naruto's pride as a shinobi and heir. The Yamanaka clan's pride in their heiress only made things worse. But Naruto brought more than just the pride of the clan with him. He also brought the pride of a pack. And now, when pride should have taught them all a lesson, it was the only thing they had left to hold on to. The world was so cruel. He had never been so stupid to think otherwise, though. He was a shinobi and a realist. Whether they wanted to admit it or not, they had a real problem. Now, all that was left to do was figure out the best way to fix it. But even that had to be put on hold for now because Konoha needed to know at the very least. He knew they wouldn't do anything, but they needed to know about the danger that wasn't just nearby, but had been among them. Still, not many people would believe what he said because they didn't think it was possible for a secret group to get inside Konoha and set up a base of operations, no matter how small, inside the city's walls. Just one more example of how pride can get in the way. Still, people didn't believe him when he said that a nearby country was taken over by the same group that had brought down his own clan right in front of their eyes. He would leave out the part about the Inuzuka, since telling that would do him no good. Since the Nara and Akamichi have moved away since becoming the Uzumaki's servant clans, he needed friends more than ever. He quickly looked at Shuza and Shikaku, who looked hungry and bored, just like they always did when he thought of them. Even though he knew Shikaku always went over everything he heard in meetings like this, it seemed like nothing ever changed for them. The man had always been a planner, and he felt that he could never think too much if it meant he had to work less in the end. If anyone believed what he was going to say, it would be him, but he wouldn't act or say anything to show that he did. He thought Sume would too, but she didn't really count because she was part of the news he was about to tell everyone in the room. In fact, it would be interesting to see how she reacts. He would know if she knew about his mistake or not by how she responded now and after he talked to her later to try to work out a deal between the clans. Just yesterday, his own spy came back, so it was possible for her to know. Of course, he had even more reason to talk to her now if she didn't know yet. The sooner this was done, the better, but it could also go horribly wrong if she thought he only helped her because he had just angered the wolves. But if she didn't know about the event, that would be good for him. It meant she wasn't that important. The wolves didn't care to tell her what their fellow clan did, or the wolves didn't know yet who was behind the spies and, sadly, the deaths of their packmates. That was definitely not what he wanted in the least. It was also a big reason why this plan might not work. It was understandable that the wolves didn't like spies, but the Yamanaka would be fine if Naruto didn't mind too much. He was sure that, if nothing else, the young man would understand what he was doing. The Yamanaka didn't have anything to do with it, though. It was him. Naruto was just as likely to pick him out and leave the rest of the clan alone, even if he didn't know it was all him, as he was to go against the clan as a whole. He even thought the boy might start selling flowers based on what he knew about him. That might sound strange, but the Yamanaka haven't been able to get as many missions as they used to because people don't trust them as much as they used to. Because of this, most of their money now came from gardening and flower shops. If Naruto was in a bad mood, there was no doubt that he would ship in flowers and sell them for so little that the Yamanaka would lose what little business they did have. Then they would have to depend on Kushina for all their money. Even so, she might decide to leave them because of that. Her money was a lot, but it was also limited. She wasn't doing anything to add to them, and almost all of her assets could be turned into cash quickly. He realized that it might work, but it was also pretty risky. After all, if she stopped giving them money, how were they going to live? Also, Kushina didn't really think things through anymore. He wouldn't be too surprised if she was willing to empty the Uzumaki bank accounts in order to get her son back. No matter how he looked at it, this was a mess, and he wasn't sure if he'd ever be able to fix it. Even so, Naruto didn't seem to have anything against Ino. Maybe she could do what he couldn't and bring the clan back together. When he had put her in a similar situation before, she had done a very good job. He had expected her to do well, and he was always there to make sure everything went well. However, his little princess had gotten used to her new role much faster than he had. And he had been trained for the job before taking it. Not trained in the sense that he had taught her lessons up to that point, but actually trained by his father as they took care of clan business. It was pretty amazing, and it was good of her to want to fix what she had done. He had to wonder if the best thing he did as clan leader wasn't to raise her so she could take his place and fix the mistakes he made. It was a sad thought, but he felt better knowing that she would keep his clan safe. Now, all that was left to do was get them out from under Kushina's thumb. Maybe he should try to make things better between the two of them. Kushina would benefit from it, and since Ino is on good terms with Naruto, he might be willing to help her get her clan back, especially since Kushina stole it from him. He probably needed to talk to his daughter again, and her Uzumaki friend was probably going to be there. He didn't know where they stood in this mess, but their drive to learn everything about it was more than he would have expected from a group of new genin. He knew, of course, because they were well aware that they were part of this mess and that it would affect them not just now but for a long time. Ino was growing up quickly from the fangirl she had become in the academy, and even Naruto, who was still young and naive, was growing up a bit and starting to think about the consequences of her actions. Even though it was earlier than he thought, it might have been time for the next generation. He and the other older people had been through a lot and stuck to their ways, but a pack of wolves was leading a change. His generation wasn't ready for that, and they weren't flexible enough to stop the wildfire started by a young man who thought like a shinobi many years older than him. Yes, once he had secured the clan, it would go to Ino and he would step back to be a guide. They needed someone young who could look at the world with fresh eyes and see everything that would soon die in this new age of shinobi. But, as he said before, he had to first warn the current generation about the change that was coming. He couldn't just tell them, but he could get them to look at the center of the storm so they could see it for what it was. Sume knew that Shikaku would understand, but would the others be able to figure out what was going on? Shuza wasn't the type to look into things like this. Shibi was always ready to change in order to keep the hive alive and would act when he saw the best chance, and Hiyashi and the rest of the Hyuga clan would think that the storm coming wouldn't be a problem for them. They'd try to make it through the storm. They would be wrong. He didn't know how the Sarutobi would react. Hiruzen might have already figured it out and told them, and he didn't know what Kushina would do. There was just enough noise in the room to keep people from hearing him tap his foot nervously. It wasn't good to let people know you were worried about something, and if it had been too quiet, everyone would have known. As it was, even a small drop in noise would have probably told Sume that he was nervous. He did not make the best first impression before he tried to work with her. He didn't pay much attention to what was being said in the room. Nothing caught his attention, and Kushina was the one who needed to know. At this point, he was not much more than a figurehead. But when Hiruzen asked if there was anything else to talk about in front of the council, he stood up quickly to calm himself down. The old Hokage asked, "Yes, Councilman Yamanaka. There were rumors that he would train his son for the job, but nothing has been proven yet. It would be nice for the old shinobi to finally be free of all the responsibilities that come with being Hokage." The gods knew that he needed a very long break. "I've heard some news, Hokage-sama, and I thought it would be best to share it with this council so that we can all know what's going on." "Alright, go ahead. Of course. This is a matter that is very important to me and my clan, so we've been doing our best to keep track of any and all information about it." Get to the point. Inuzuka Sume has always been impatient, and the fact that she cut him off showed that she still is. She also never used flowery language, which was strange given that she was on the council. At the very least, it might be nice for a change if she spoke up for herself. Still, he gave her a half glare because she had interrupted him and because this news was about her clan. Because of this, he kept looking her in the eyes as he talked. He said it straight out. The wolves have moved again. They are in charge of Nami no Kuni. If the way her eyes grew slightly wider was any indication, she knew what he meant by giving her that pointed look. The fact that she didn't believe in the wolves before shows that this is true. On the other hand, Kushina laughed. You always talk about these mystery wolves, but I've never seen one. We're in Konoha. How long could they stay hidden? She didn't notice how Shikaku, Hiruzen, and two of the elders turned to look at the third. Danzo tried very hard to look innocent, which was very funny. Inoichi said, you can believe whatever you want, but they are out there, and they just took over a country. I just wanted everyone to know, and it's up to you if you choose not to do anything about it. Hiruzen spoke up before a fight could start. I guess that would explain why I got a letter right before the meeting. I was going to bring it up later, when I was sure I had all the information I needed, but I guess now is as good a time as any. Everyone looked at the Hokage. What letter? What did it have to do with Inoichi's claim that the wolves had taken control of Nami no Kuni? As Inoichi said, the wolves, the Hokage went on to say. They are real, and the daimyo likes them so much that he made them a noble house of the Imperial Fire Court just recently. And that even surprised Inoichi. A great home? That was totally out of the blue. Those who didn't believe Inoichi before seemed both surprised and embarrassed. Even Kushina seemed a little embarrassed, but she didn't really believe they were working in Konoha until Danzo said something. They already have a base set up in the village. Since the paperwork for the change of ownership just went through this morning and they're already there, we can confirm that they've been in the village unofficially for some time. People who live in the area say the group has been there for well over a year. That long? Shikaku asked. Danzo fixed it by saying, longer. Tsukiyomi, who has recently come out as a man and goes by the name Tsukiyomi, started the wolves here in Konoha almost 2.5 years ago. Only a few of them noticed how Sume tensed up when he heard the news. Hiyashi asked, and how long have you known? He didn't like that his clan, which could see everything, had missed this group in Konoha. They started out as private security, I guess you could say, he said. It was hard not to laugh at his words. After all, he often called his root forces his private security. From the Hokage's expression, which was far from amused, it was clear that Hiruzen understood the joke. Good, because it wouldn't be fair for him to be the only one who got the joke. Even though, enjoy, didn't really work in this situation, he was sure Hiruzen was pretty upset. Still, at least he knew what was going on. That meant something, right? Shibi asked, who's the private security? Even he seemed to be interested in this. I'd say Tsukiyomi's, the old warhawk said. It wasn't hard to see the amusement in his eyes, but the rest of his face was as stone-like as ever. Even without taking into account how much he showed it, the fact that he was amused was a bit unsettling, and it put everyone on edge who noticed it. I see. Shibi wasn't happy with the answer, but she was happy to leave it at that. She probably thought it would be pointless to ask for more information. Inoichi was surprised, though, that Sume was the one who asked for more details. Either she was trying to hide or she was just interested. He was betting on the second one because she wasn't known for being sneaky or cunning, and he could understand if she didn't know much about the mysterious person she had teamed up with. She asked, do we know anything about this Tsukiyomi? Does anyone know anything at all about him? Of course we do, Sume, Danzo replied with a smile that made everyone uncomfortable. The old shinobi wasn't supposed to act this way, so what on earth made him feel better? He is Nami no Kuni's daimyo. What? It was a pretty broad thought that didn't apply to any one person in the group. Hiruzen and, of course, Danzo were the only two exceptions. Shikaku asked, more to himself than to anyone else, he's the daimyo? On the other hand, his next question was meant for everyone in the room. Was he the daimyo when he set up the wolves as his private security force? Hiruzen glared at his old teammate and said, not as far as we can tell. As I was saying, our daimyo supported this Tsukiyomi in his position as Nami no Kuni's next daimyo. He immediately formed an alliance with the new daimyo and offered him a position in the court. We can assume that the wolves were used to secure his position as daimyo in the first place, and since the House of Wolves is part of the Imperial Fire Court, they're as good as approved by our daimyo. So Inoichi's monsters were real, and now they have the support of the daimyo? It was the first time Shuza had spoken in the whole meeting. You're right. The happy Akamichi shrugged and said, all right. I hope my clan's restaurants will get more customers. Does anyone know how many people will be in Konoha? No one was all that shocked. Shuza was pretty laid back when he wasn't on the battlefield, and as an Akamichi, he was more interested in his restaurants than the fact that they had been broken into. Konoha was still there, right? That was fine with him. There was no point in worrying about something that had already happened. We don't know how many will be here, but I wouldn't be surprised if the number changes often. Since they're working more openly these days, they should be a common sight. How will we know who is a wolf and who is just using a disguise to get in? Also, how will we know they aren't bringing in shinobi from other countries? As part of Hai no Kuni, they'll have special IDs, but other than that, there's not much we can do. This has never happened before, and trying to stop them or make them follow new security rules is likely to make the daimyo angry. Shikaku said, that's a bit of a problem. We're just supposed to let them waltz in? They should be treated like visiting Hai no Kuni samurai or diplomatic envoys. The same rules will apply to them as to Hai no Kuni citizens. The only big problem is figuring out who they are. I don't think they wear masks just for looks, and anything else we could try that wouldn't require them to show their faces is too easy to copy to be useful. The Nara sighed deeply. He asked, I'll try to come up with a plan, but we'll have to get in touch with them at some point, and I don't think they'd like it if Anbu just showed up at their door. Unfortunately, not right now. Hiruzen didn't lie. Naruto was still outside of Konoha, probably with the wolves, so they had to wait until he came back. It also kept people from finding out for a long time that he knew about the wolves and Naruto's relationship with them. Inoichi, on the other hand, didn't think the same way. We can always get in touch with them through Gen and Naruto. I know he has ties to them, he said, ignoring the looks Hiruzen and Kushina sent his way. Even if he can't do it himself, he'll be able to point us in the right direction of someone who can. Are you sure he has something to do with them? Hiyashi asked. He wondered how this would change the dinner he had planned for the genin. On the one hand, having ties to a new noble house wasn't a bad thing. On the other hand, the wolves weren't very popular in Konoha right now, and they had just become an official noble house. I don't know how much, but I know he's connected to them. The first attack on my clan was a warning, an official statement, and he was there with 2 wolves. Whether he's a member or not, he knows them. I see. If nothing else, the dinner would give him a chance to figure out how the young man was connected to the wolves. Just that alone was enough to convince him to do it. Already, plans were being made, and he had to thank him on behalf of the clan. Already, the fact that he hadn't done it before was a shame. Well, I think that's enough on this subject for now. Thank you, Inoichi, for bringing it up. With that said, though, I think I'll end this meeting. No one was going to argue with the Hokage as they all got up and left. Inoichi's job wasn't done yet, which was a shame. Clan leader Sume, do you have a minute to talk to me? He just knew it was going to be a long day. Clan leader Sume, do you have a minute? If she hadn't been in Inuzuka, she could have pretended not to hear him, but she knew that no one would believe her if she did, so her heart beat a little faster as she thought about trying anyway. When he first told her about the wolves, he gave her a look that was easy to figure out. She didn't know how he knew, what he was going to do with that information, or why he wanted to talk to her, but she didn't like it. No one should have known no one. Still, he did it. If people found out about her relationship with the wolves in a month, it wouldn't be a big deal. An alliance with an up-and-coming group was easy to accept, even though it wasn't like Inuzuka Sume to be interested in politics. The same thing was true about it coming out in 2 weeks. She might even be able to get away with it in as little as a week if people believed her explanation that the acceptance and familiarity of her pack was just natural synergy. It was a bit of a stretch, but it was possible. Less than that, on the other hand, would be hard to explain. Well, there was no need to explain because the answer was clear. No, it would be hard to lie about, since that's what she was really doing, wasn't she? Her relationship with the wolves was a secret because it had been going on for more than a month and her daughter was the governor of Nami no Kuni, which was a very important job. Nami no Kuni. Weeb. How did he find out about the takeover? Was that how he found out it was her own clan? Did he see Hana, or was it just her daughter's group? What did he really know? She wouldn't be able to know for sure how much he knew, and she would have to rely almost entirely on what he told her to get even a basic idea. She could usually tell when someone was lying, and sometimes she could tell how the clan head felt, but dealing with the Yamanaka was never easy, and you never knew what they were really thinking. Much different from herself, who probably had lots of small clues that the Mindwalker could use. Maybe that's why he wanted to talk to her right now. She turned away from the doorway and thought, ah, sweet freedom, escape is just out of her reach. When she looked into his eyes, she knew right away that he had probably seen her nerves. Even though what she did wasn't technically wrong, that didn't mean that letting the other clans and even Konohagakure no Sato know about it wouldn't cause her trouble. When was Sho going to find out that the wolves were now a noble house? Wouldn't do much to help. On the other hand, it would help a lot if people knew she had been hanging out with a possible enemy the whole time. Even though the possibility would keep her and her clan out of the fire, they would still be in trouble. She was glad that her clans would have the help they needed if everything went wrong. They could run away to the capital as friends of the House of Wolves or go to Nami no Kuni, an ally of Hai no Kuni, as partners of their daimyo and ask for refuge there. Actually, neither of those sounded too bad. In fact, they would have more status and power as one of Konoha's lesser clans if they chose either of those options. Now that she thought about it, it was kind of sad. She replied as calmly as she could, I guess I could spare a minute or two. She just said something that was very unlike Sume, and she knew it just as quickly as Inoichi did. Those who were still around them had no doubt also noticed this. It looks like some of her other relationships are going to cause trouble, too, since she's been spending too much time with Mai lately. She tried to ignore the growing unease in the back of her neck as Inoichi raised one eyebrow in question. She didn't dare look away to see what people were thinking, because doing so would have made her look as nervous as she felt. I know you must be busy, so I'll thank you ahead of time, Sume said. They both knew this was a blatant lie. They both knew that she didn't have anything she had to do. Hopefully, she was the only one who knew that it was because her daughter was working for the good of the clan, leaving her with only the daily Konoha paperwork to do each morning. Have to take care of the territory, you know. Can't have newcomers thinking they can steal from my pack. Making something up and saying it was a clan matter was the best she could do in such a short amount of time, but it was also probably the best given her clan and how she usually acts. At first, he seemed surprised and took the bait, but then he seemed to get something from what she said and his eyes got narrow. Ah, yes, your pack. There must have been a lot more births than usual in the last few years, he said almost as an afterthought. It looks like it has gotten a lot worse. I don't like his wisdom. Still, she had to give him credit for that. He caught words that she hadn't even realized she'd said. And for him to think about what she said from the point of view of the Inuzuka and come to a real conclusion so quickly. There was a good reason why the Yamanaka had always been in charge of T&I. Nara Shikaku was the only other person who should have made that connection, because he would think about everything he heard 100 different ways and have a whole conversation with you before he even answered. If the Nara clan had been interested in politics, any conversation with them would have been a nightmare filled with political minds. It was a scary thought, and she was sure that the Inuzuka wouldn't be the only clan to decide that the political game was too hard to even try. She said, I suppose it has. I don't keep track of numbers, it's just family, he said. Not really. The wolves weren't that close, but they all worked together, and that was enough to think of the wolves and the Inuzuka as one pack. Not a close-knit group, but still a group. It was strange to call them family, but it was likely to happen in time. It was just too likely that the two would mate for her to think otherwise. This might have been what it was like to get to know your future in-laws. You didn't know them and weren't close to them, but you knew that would change soon, even if it was just for your family's sake. She liked the wolves, though, so the thought didn't bother her too much. She should probably think of herself as lucky, because God knew that whoever Kiba married would have the strangest family ever. They would have to if they were going to date her son. He nodded and said, of course, of course. I know you live in the woods, but I have to ask, have you ever thought about living in the mountains? She understood that he was talking about his own clan and what he was trying to say. He wanted to know what she thought of the Yamanaka and what the whole pack, including the wolves, thought of them. There was only one reason for him to ask, and that was because his clan had bad luck when they were fighting Naruto and, by extension, the wolves, who are now on her side. He wanted to be there, too. She was almost no longer nervous, but she was still careful. I hadn't thought of that, but it sounds like a great idea for a hunting trip. We'll have to try it sometime. Would you like to continue this conversation somewhere else? she was still aware that they were in the council chambers, which wasn't the best place for this kind of conversation. "That sounds good to me," he said with a nod, and then he moved to lead her out of the room. As the two went to talk about the new official residence of Konoha, neither of them noticed the black pineapple sitting on one of the tables. When the pineapple was picked up, it revealed the face of Nara Shikaku. Her shoes almost flew off her feet and hit the wall of the entryway with a hard thud, but she didn't even notice. Naruto and the Yamanaka had told her about them, but she still held on to the hope that they were just an urban legend or, at most, a loose group of souls who had fallen on hard times and turned to petty crimes to make a living. That would have been fine. She could have accepted that her son was part of a close-knit group of survivors who looked out for each other and came to think of themselves as a family. Then what? Not only a group, but a real noble house. If nothing else, family claims were absolute. No one could say no to a family that had won the favor of a more powerful daimyo. Even back then, this was not a small group that had grown into a noble house of the Imperial Fire Court. Instead, it was an organization that had started small and grown in ways that few could have imagined. Her baby boy, her son, was a part of it, but what kind of job? Were they wolves? A friend? Did he do something for them, like give them information or get them into groups that wouldn't trust them? Was he just friends with some of them, like maybe their leader, or did he have a deeper connection to this group? Could this Tsukiyomi, who had brought them up from nothing, be their leader? She really didn't want that to be true, but if it was, she couldn't help but be proud of him and all he had done. It would also tell us a lot about how he felt about the Yamanaka. Whether she was a leader or not, she was thinking about something much more important at the time. The wolves couldn't be that bad if the daimyo liked them enough to give them a house on his court right away, and the wolves' status as a noble house would make sure that her son would be taken care of, no matter how he was involved. No, she had to pay attention to the trouble in Konoha. He had left to go on a little vacation, which made her remember how painful it had been to leave Konoha with Naruto and come back 4 years later. He was only going to be gone for a little over a month, but even though he wasn't close to her anymore, his absence still hurt and made her wonder how he could have gone 4 years without feeling anything close to what she felt right now. She knew he was going to come back, but the thought that he might not, that there was a small chance he would never come back, made her feel afraid. Had he shared her fears when she left, or did he think she would never come back because he never got her note or because Tsunade took him in when she found out he was locked out of the compound? She got rid of the thought by shaking her head. That wasn't something to think about now. She was back, and she was back with him, for him. She wouldn't have left in the first place if she didn't need to get away from him for his own good, but even if all three of them had left together, she had to wonder if they would have bothered coming back. The only thing that kept her in Konoha was her children, and both of them would have been happy to go with her back then. Since they were wrong about how the Kyuubi's chakra was affecting Naruto, it would have been better for her to just take him with her and end all of their problems in Konoha. There were problems, but they wouldn't have been there if she had stayed. But, as she said, it wasn't the right time for those thoughts to bother her. Naruto was out of the village, and she hoped that when he came back, he'd have a new outlook and be more open to her efforts to get the family back to how it was before she broke it up to protect him. And when he did come back, she didn't want him to be distracted by other things that were out of her control. Like the Yamanaka family. Inoichi. As she thought about the head of the Yamanaka clan, she almost growled the name. She knew that he was up to something, but she couldn't figure out what. He was getting close to Sume, for fuck's sakes. Was he trying to court her, tying the clans together and maybe using the extra weight to pull the Yamanaka away from her? Maybe, and that could also be done with their children. She couldn't think of a reason why he would want to talk to her after a meeting about the wolves and their recent movements. There was something up there, but she didn't know what it was. It wasn't surprising that he knew the wolves were in Wave because her daughter was friends with Ino, but his confirmation that they had completely taken over was. One could have figured this out if they knew the wolves as well as he did and came to the logical conclusion, but that didn't feel right. She knew she was missing something, maybe a lot of things, but she didn't know what it was. Was she forgetting something about how Inoichi knew about the wolves? He seemed as surprised as everyone else that they had become a noble house, but that couldn't have been the whole story. Was it something he did with Sume? What could he do that could hurt her, or what could he be trying to keep from her? She made a sad face. He was trying to keep something from us, but what? And, most importantly, how would it affect her son? Just off the main road, the carriage came to a stop slowly. Even though it linked Konohagakure no Sado to the capital of Hai no Kuni, it was always strange how little people seemed to use it. Still, Not many people went back and forth between the two places often, and those who did were usually messengers who walked. The average traveler just didn't have easy access to carriages and horses. It also helped that, for some strange reason, the trade routes were different from the main roads. He could never understand why they didn't just make one bigger road. As the wolves set up a fence around their temporary camp, he felt a warm body press against his side. Other than that, he didn't show any signs of waking up. But that might be because the person curled up on his side wasn't sleeping and hadn't been for a few hours. Since his trip was almost over and they were going to have to part soon, it was getting harder and harder for her to fall asleep. Even though sleep was nice when you didn't have much else to do, he didn't think she would want to spend the little time she had with him sleeping. He had found that she liked spending her time with her last precious person much more. And there was no way he could refuse to give in to her. She muttered something in his ear, but whatever she said was lost in his shirt. What was that, Makoto Ka-chan? He could feel her smile before she turned around to show it to him, and her black eyes were almost shining with happiness. Well, they still had tears in them, but they were happy tears, so he figured that was close enough. I love it when you call me that, Naruto-kun. He laughed and ran his fingers through her hair. I know, Ka-chan, I know. What were you trying to say? Her smile turned into a frown, but in his eyes it was still more like a pout. I don't want to go. Almost as if she thought they were going to be separated right then, she wrapped her arms around his torso and pulled her body closer to his. He didn't act like he cared, if he did. You know that's not a choice, you're not a wanted criminal. She was thought to be dead, after all. But they will do anything to get rid of you. Her pout deepened. Are you sure? She asked. I could be used to start the clan over, and they wouldn't want to miss out on that. When she said that, he let out a low growl. He would be the first to admit that he was very protective of what he had, and she was his right now. That did, of course, lead to some problems. It was hard for her to stay away from him, and it was hard for her to leave when they were together, like now. As her last important person, she tended to be almost as possessive of him as he was of her. Because she wanted to protect him, she often tried to persuade him to leave the wolves and stop being a shinobi for Konoha. He thought it felt good, but he could see how it could get annoying. He wasn't going to let all his hard work go to waste, and even though she knew this, she still tried. If she had someone else, she would calm down, but he couldn't stand the thought of someone else having her. No, she said, and he took his hand off her hair and wrapped his arm tightly around her. You're mine. She laughed softly at this. Don't worry, Ka-chan won't leave you, she said. She turned away from him and put her head on his chest. Still, she said, lowering her voice until it was barely above a whisper. I could be in Konoha, and I could take care of you. Wouldn't you want that? You got away from them, so the High Council is going to want to control you. It wouldn't surprise me if they turned your escape into you going rogue. Even if they let you live, they would take you from me. She sighed in disappointment but didn't try to change his mind. She knew about the massacre. Even if they brought her clan back, she would be constantly watched, and after the first few kids, she would probably be killed so they could control the birth of the new clan. But you'd want me to come back if I could, right? He kissed the top of her head as he bent down. Sure, Ka-chan. I'll see if I can get you a wolf mask so we can sneak you in sometimes. That made her pay attention, and she looked up to meet his eyes. Really? Her pure hope made her look almost like a child. Really, she said. When he said yes, she tightened her hold on him even more, almost to the point where he couldn't breathe. A few seconds later, her voice was almost shy, but it still had all of its strength. See, can you get me in today? It was clear she didn't want to leave him, and if he were honest, he didn't want her to leave either. He thought about it with a frown, knowing that her eyes were still on his face because she was hoping he would let her. Even though he was the only one who could let her in, the fact that she asked him first made him think of his pet lamb, which made him like her even more. It also made things harder because he didn't want to see her sad face if he turned her down. Even that wasn't easy, so how could anyone say no to her? But, as much as he wanted to, he couldn't just ignore the facts to make her happy. The House of Wolves had just started, and they were about to become an official part of Konoha. Actually, they were already part of Konoha if the runner he sent to Konoha made it there, which he was sure of. Now, on the other hand, they were going to be seen often. At the moment, there was only a small force in Konoha, and most of them were there to protect Mai and Hinata. When Naruto came back, though, there would be more, even if he didn't tell them to. The jerk Sai would definitely send a full guard behind his back, and that would be if he was lucky. Naruto was kind of hoping that 2 full guards and extra troops would show up at the Konoha base. Since a full guard could have anywhere from 10 to 12 people, or even 13, which was often called the Baker's Guard, in jest, there would be a huge increase in the number of wolves. And while it might calm the shinobi village's fears a little, having a group no one could see was sure to make them nervous. It would also draw their attention. Even though he wanted to take her to Konoha, now wasn't the right time. I'm sorry, Ka-chan, but we're going to be watched too carefully. Oh, okay. The sad look on her face almost made him sneak her in anyway, regardless of the consequences, but he had to think about more than just himself. Even though he wanted her with him and didn't want her to be upset, he couldn't bring her with him right now because it would be bad for both her and the wolves. No, this way was better. She turned away from him to hide her sadness at not being able to spend more time with him or go home for the first time in years. He used his free right hand to show her that he knew she was upset. When things settled down, Ka-chan, I'll take you to Konoha with me, he told her. I promise. She didn't ask him if he was serious, because that wouldn't have helped. Naruto never, I repeat, never made a promise. He was a man of his word, so he never broke his promise. For him to promise meant that he would do everything he could to make it happen, and that was enough for her. Okay, she said. There was silence for a few minutes. They were both enjoying each other's company but knew it would soon be over. Makoto's voice rose again, this time with a note of resignation. I guess I should probably get going, since we're pretty close to Konoha already. Both of them knew it had been risky to get this far, but it had been worth it in the end. He agreed and said, we are. Ka-chan, it was nice to see you again. She smiled at him again, but this time it was a little sad because she knew they were going to be apart soon. She quickly put on her cloak by taking it from the other side of the stopped carriage. On the other hand, she frowned irritably at the mask. She hated the damn thing, but hiding her face from Naruto was even worse. It made her feel like she couldn't be trusted, which is funny since she was his spy. It made her feel like she was hiding something from him. She wasn't, of course, but she still felt like she was. She turned away from the hated mask to look at him and asked, you'll keep sending me letters, won't you? She felt better after spending time with him, but she still worried that she'd be left with nothing again. She couldn't stand the thought of losing him after everything else Itachi, her traitorous brother, had taken away from her. He wasn't her son. No, her only son was standing in front of her with a gentle smile that warmed her heart and made her feel like everything would be okay. Of course, and if a raven isn't available, I'll ask one of A's children for help. She looked at him strangely, not knowing what he meant, and he didn't try to explain. He would then let that be a little surprise. Speaking of children, he said next, completely catching her off guard. If it's not too much trouble, I'd like you to give this to the wolves for me. He took a letter from beside him and started to hand it to her as she stared at him blankly, desperately trying to figure out how the wolves were related to any children the 12-year-old daimyo might have. Didn't he really not have any puppies running around? And kittens? She made me think of Sume. His voice broke her out of her thoughts. I figured that you might like to meet the rest of the family. Who else is there? Then she must have had a daughter-in-law. Grandchildren. The thought itself wasn't bad, but the idea that Naruto might be married and have kids was awful. A family? He looked at her in a strange way. He said, of course, but he seemed a little confused. What else would my backpack be? She couldn't even put into words how happy that made her. He would think of the wolves as his family, but what did that have to do with children? You said something about kids, right? Of course, the wolves, he said, wondering why she was having trouble getting this. I gave birth to the wolves, so they are my children. Ah, yes. She felt dumb because she should have been able to make that connection on her own. He then remembered that he had asked her to help him with something. Sure, I'd love to meet your family. I guess that makes them kind of like my grandchildren, right? He cocked his head. I suppose it does. Well, it did if she were his mother, but even though he said she was, he didn't really think of her that way. Maybe an aunt, especially a close aunt, or maybe even a sister. Even though she sometimes felt more like a daughter, she was looking for a family because she didn't have one, and in her mind, he could only fill 2 roles. He could be either her husband or her son. Since he was only 12, she did the only thing that made sense. Still, it made her happy and didn't take much from him, so he gave in. He did have to wonder, though, how long it would be before she didn't need him anymore. Would his filling it even let her get to that point, or would she just turn around and start seeing him in a romantic way? Already, she wasn't acting like a mother should, so it wasn't hard to think that she just wanted to be close to someone, and because of what had happened to her family, he was the first person who came to mind. In that case, the only thing that made them a mother and son was their names. He knew that she would have to figure that out for herself at some point, but he didn't know when. And even more important, what would she do? She might try to keep things the same. Would she do something else? She might just change the name of their relationship and leave it at that. But whether or not that was her true nature, she did her best to be a mother and saw him as her son. As much as he gave in to her, he was like a father whose daughter had him wrapped around her little finger. He would play along until she got tired of it. But I don't think any of them could see you that way. Why not? She seemed slightly distressed at not being able to take on the role of grandmother or the idea that his family wouldn't accept her he didn't know. You're too young, it was simple enough, but she was rather partial to his compliments he had noticed during their journey. Knowing that he continued, and far too beautiful for them to think of you as a grandmother. A faint dusting of red painted her cheeks, as he had expected. Really? She tried to act shy, but it was obvious she was just after more compliments. Despite knowing this, Naruto gave a grin and, like with most things, indulged her. Like a goddess. He thought that was pretty funny, personally, considering that Hinata had been named a goddess by her cult. He had been named after a god because of his status over her, and the woman he was complimenting had claimed the position of his mother. After all, what could the mother of a god be but a goddess? A soft giggle left her lips before she leaned in for a quick hug, planting a small kiss on his cheek. You're so sweet, Naruto-kun. Write me soon, okay? He gave her a single nod, and with a smile she left his carriage. He had no doubt that by the time he were to leave himself she'd be out of view. Shaking his head, he made to leave anyway. After all, this was their first break in hours and the last one before they reached Konoha. He might as well make the most of it. They had snuck him into Konoha easily enough, not wanting to give people any further reason to believe him to be Tsukiyomi. As it was, the less people that knew the better. His home, which he hadn't seen in over a month now, was welcoming. No doubt some of the wolves he left for Mai had taken it upon themselves to take care of the apartment while he was away. Their effort was appreciated. A quick shower, the luxury of bathing having been unavailable since his stay at the daimyo's palace, left him more relaxed than he had been in weeks. The combination of being clean, warm, and in a place he was so familiar with led to him laying comfortably on his couch. It came as no surprise that he soon fell asleep. Later, perhaps minutes, maybe even hours, he felt hands gently cup his head and lift it into the air. He didn't bother so much as opening his eyes at the feeling. Not only would the wolves have stopped anyone who could have meant him harm, but the actions were far too familiar for him not to know exactly who was in his home with him. True to his expectations, a weight settled on the couch where his head had been, and he was gently lowered to rest on the person's lap. Cracking a single eye open confirmed it as Mai, who smiled softly down at her lord. Leaning down to kiss his forehead in a surprising display of affection, her smile grew ever so slightly. Welcome home, Naruto-sama. Tired as he was, it didn't stop the smile that spread over his own lips. It felt good to be back. When nimble fingers began running through his crimson hair and a soft hum filled the air, he relaxed even further, sinking again into sleep's comforting embrace. Mai seemed pleased by this, her smile becoming serene as everything returned to how it should be. She was here for him again, by his side as she was always meant to be. With tender fondness she continued to gaze down at her lord. If she had any say about it, this is where she'd always be. But even if she wasn't, she'd always be waiting for his return. Welcome home, master. Because even if she wasn't always with him, she'd always be there for him. The pale light got brighter until the room was filled with the burning orange of a sun that was going out. Still, she didn't move. As she gently ran her fingers through his red hair, she hummed softly, which filled the otherwise quiet apartment. Much to her sadness, it didn't work out. She wasn't sure when she first noticed the change in her lord's face, or when his bright purple eyes opened to look at her as the land of Nod lost its hold on him, but when she did, she smiled softly. She told him, "Good evening, Naruto-sama. Did you sleep well?" He didn't do anything to get off her lap or stop her fingers from running through the mess of blood on top of his head. Also, she didn't do anything to stop because, now that her lord was back, she wanted to spend as much time and talk to him as she could. She didn't stop humming either. She only stopped long enough to say hello to him before starting up again, hoping to keep him as calm as she could. I did, he said. His voice, like her humming, was soft and no longer had the authoritative tone it usually had. No one knew for sure if it was because she was there, because he had just woken up, or because he didn't want to drown out her humming. Anything happen that I need to know about? He saw the momentary frown that crossed her face. Perhaps. She didn't give him a straight answer because she knew the news wouldn't make him happy. She didn't want to upset him because she had just gotten him back, and she was sure he would get right back to work until everything was fixed to his satisfaction. That was too bad, because it meant she wouldn't get to see much of Naruto. She asked, "Are you sure you want to know now? You just got back, so you should take a break." He cocked his head in question because she didn't want to tell him what had happened. He wasn't sure if it was because something big had happened or because he didn't need to worry about small things right now. But if he had to guess, he'd probably say the second one. What went on? Nothing that can't wait until at least the morning, she insisted, moving her hand from his hair to his neck and shoulders to feel how tense he was getting. Putting off telling him was already making him angry, but how much worse would it be to tell him what news a runner brought only hours before he got back? She started lightly rubbing his muscles as she started humming again. She was trying to calm him down. It did not work. My. All of the softness in his voice was gone, and in its place was a hard, commanding tone that he rarely used with her. "We caught 2 spies in Wave," she said. When she felt him relax beneath her, she let out a small sigh of relief. It wasn't much, but you could tell. Spies. Is that all? Who did they work for, Danzo? Spies were common in the Elemental Nation, and since Wave took over, a fair number of them had been following him. They would always be there, but their numbers would go down over time. There was nothing to worry or be upset about, and he briefly wondered why Mai didn't want to tell him. Maybe it was the first choice, which was something so common and unimportant that it wasn't worth bothering him with yet. As far as we can tell, Root has been pretty open about who they are, which I think is so Danzo can make fun of us if one of his agents gets deeper into Wave than we've been letting them. Naruto nodded. He had thought about doing the same thing to Root, since he knew his wolves had the same training and were familiar with the Shadow Organization. Then how do we know who? She said, not completely. The first one was caught, and the second one was killed. Her voice trailed off because she didn't know what part of the situation to talk about first. Does she start with the hardest part so that the rest won't be as bad, or does she build up so she can stop if he gets too mad? The father of the wolves asked, and again, his eyes were closed as he enjoyed the gentle touch of her deft fingers. She chose to start with the bigger news. When he asked for more information, she told him what they knew, so he knew where to direct his anger. And there was a third. She stopped there, waiting to see how he would react. One eye opened and looked straight into hers. A third? His voice had a low growl that was almost too quiet to hear. She took a quick breath and said, "Why yes, there was a third spy. He got away, Naruto-sama." He took a deep breath and tightened the muscles under her fingers, but he didn't say anything else. As he tried to get rid of his anger, he tightened and loosened his fists almost in time with the beat of his heart. "So you said he got away?" Naruto asked to make sure. She nodded her head. "Why yes, Naruto-sama," he said. He took another deep breath before letting go of his fists and spreading his fingers out on the soft blue fabric of his couch. "Okay, keep going." She hesitated and looked at him, wondering if it was such a good idea. She knew, though, that it would be even worse to disobey a direct order. He gave her a lot of freedom, almost too much. She could do almost anything she wanted, even with his own forces, but she still had to answer to him in the end. He still had rights to her. They were all wearing tags, she said. He growled at her, knowing where this was going. Even regular people knew that tags was short for exploding tags, which were one of the shinobi's most dangerous tools. The third was able to get rid of his own right before the bomb went off, but our wolves weren't quick enough. He noticed that she called them our wolves, as if they belonged to both of them. Even though that was the case, it still worked. She cared for the wolves, too, because she used to be one, and she and he worked together to take care of them. She wasn't just the one who told them the bad news. She was just as bad off herself, or almost as bad off. Even if only a little, it helped him calm down. He couldn't let his feelings take over right now because his wolves needed him to lead them and he wouldn't be able to do his best for them if his emotions clouded his judgment. There would be time later to be angry and sad. His body calmed down all of a sudden, and his voice stopped showing any emotion. It wasn't the soft, friendly voice he used when he woke up, nor was it the harsh voice he used when she didn't answer right away. There was no anger or sadness, and there was no way to know what he was thinking. Without a doubt, this was a lot scarier than the chance that he would blow up. His calm anger, which was known as frozen rage among the pack, didn't leave any traces. On the outside, it looks calm, but inside it's a raging fire. She had never seen this for herself, but she had heard about it. It was noticed for the first time when he graduated from the academy, and wolves in the area told him about it when he saw his mother for the first time in 4 years. What they said didn't do it justice. Even though he didn't show any signs of displeasure from the outside, there was still a sense of danger around him and a cold that seemed to grip her heart. Maybe it was just her, though, because she had gotten to know him well over the past few years and knew that the calmness he was showing at the moment was not right. He shouldn't be calm after hearing what he did, and she knew that well enough to feel shivers go down her spine at the fact that he wasn't reacting at all. At the moment, the person sitting on her lap was not her Naruto-sama. He fell off his throne and became a wolf again for a short time. It was really bad. It was lovely. He was a man to a beast, but he didn't look like a beast. But she was smarter than that. She knew him, and she knew that this lie was not her lord. But it would do what her lord told it to do until he came back. How many people did we lose? 7 of the half-guard were caught in the blast, and only 2 of them got away. I see. And we don't know who did this. She tried hard not to flinch at how casually he spoke, as if he were talking about the weather. She knew he was very angry, more angry than both she and Sai put together, but she couldn't see it. This made her skin crawl. Maybe this was a bad idea. They should have left this to the wolves to handle, since it was an internal problem that Sai and, if they could have convinced them, Orochimaru could have solved. She was sure that the snake sage would be happy to help take care of the people who sent the spies against his godson. Konoha, she kept going before he made a mistaken guess. But we don't know who did it. One of the survivors was close enough to the captured spy before the bomb went off to identify him as a Yamanaka clan member, but we don't know about the other 2. Is that true? Well, I guess I'll have to go see Inoichi. We need to find out what's going on. She could have tried to talk him out of it or told him to wait until tomorrow so he could have more time to think about it, but she knew it wouldn't help. Instead, she gave a light nod to show that she agreed. Sure. Naruto-sama. I'll let the guard know. A wall of fire could be stopped, even if only slightly, but a glacier could not be stopped. His anger was frozen solid, like a wave of ice ready to crush anyone who made him angry. He moved more slowly than the flames, but in the end, his terrible power was much stronger. She almost felt sorry for Inoichi, even if they were his spies. Even though she didn't dislike him as a person, she was glad when he left her house. Usually, a meeting between clan leaders wasn't anything special. It was part of their job to get together every few weeks or so. Inoichi, on the other hand, couldn't even be called a real clan leader because of where his clan was at the moment, which meant he couldn't do much. In the end, they could talk about plans that would help them both for a week straight, but without Kushina's help, it would be mostly a waste of time. And she felt like her time had been lost. That doesn't mean it wouldn't have been a waste of time to talk to someone else, like Kushina herself, because even though she was willing to check out other clans, she wasn't going to do anything without Mai's approval. As an ally of the wolves, anything that happened to them would also happen to her clan. The last thing she wanted was to try to make a deal with another head to help her clan, only to find out it got in the way of the wolves' plans and hurt her clan more than it helped. But with Kushina, she would at least have something to show Mai to look over. Even if they hadn't planned anything, letting them know let them make plans around it, and it was possible that they could arrange things to make any deals better. With Inoichi, it might be nothing but half promises and statements of intent. Statements that didn't mean much coming from him. The word of his daughter, Ino, was more important, but even that wasn't a sure thing. As far as she or anyone else knew, Naruto would keep the Yamanaka clan under the name Uzumaki even after her mother died. Even though the two seemed to be friends, it was still possible, and Sume wasn't going to forget how unpredictable Kushina could be. No one knew what the woman would do as she tried and failed over and over again to get her son to come back to the clan. She didn't have much to offer him, which was too bad. Luckily, she seemed to be getting it, even if it was slow. Maybe she'll calm down soon and stop trying to bribe him back into her arms. Instead, she should start getting to know him again and building a relationship with him. It would never be the same as it was before she left, and it would be silly to think it could get stronger. That is, unless they wanted to get closer than was appropriate between mother and son, but that was none of her business. However, if they both worked hard, it could be close to what it was before. But clans weren't the only reason she was glad to see him go. There was a much bigger and more important one. She couldn't go out with Mai because of him. The jerk had to pick today out of all the days. Sume never liked politics, and council meetings where everything happened in one room were even worse. She and Mai had planned to meet for lunch afterward because she knew this. Instead, she had to talk about politics with Yamanaka Inoichi, a person she had never been close to or friendly with. And they hadn't accomplished anything. He showed her all the information he knew, or at least all the information he wanted her to know he knew. He had been looking for the wolves' allies for a while, but he just found out it was them recently. He wouldn't say how. Still, it was understandable that he would try to put his clan in a good position with hers in order to win the wolves' favor. This is understandable, but not liked. Mai had been waiting in the house while he went on and on about how little their clans could do if they worked together. Their clans just didn't go together that well, and if she hadn't known that his whole goal was to work with the wolves in some way, she would have thought he was a fool. But Mai had left a long time ago. She hadn't smelled one of the young woman's guards around for hours. Both smells went away soon after that. Something must have come up that made it impossible for them to get dinner instead. It wasn't that big of a deal. Their relationship wasn't romantic, and the only sexual thing about it was the way they teased each other. The relationship was friendly and gave them both a break from the stress of the world. Even so, that didn't make her feel any better about them not going out. Sume shut the door to her house with a deep sigh. Even if she hadn't had a date with Mai, she would have liked being with her on the couch or while they slept together. It looked like it was going to be a lonely night, which was too bad. "I promised you, didn't I?" he asked, shaking his head. "But even now, my mind wanders away from you. You deserve better than that," he said in a soft whisper that would have been hard to hear if someone had been standing nearby. But there was no one else around him. No, it wasn't empty, but there were no people there. The pale fingers moved slowly over the rough stone. They never bothered to smooth it out because they knew that in a few years, nature would take care of that. He couldn't see the name carved into its face because the sun had already set, but he didn't need to because he knew what it said. Yamanaka Tatsuki. His voice had gotten even softer, to the point where he could barely hear it himself. The smile that came on his face was so small that it was almost impossible to see. "You know, you've probably caused most of my problems. If I hadn't met you, Mito wouldn't have been jealous, I wouldn't have gone against the Yamanaka, the House of Wolves wouldn't exist, and the closest thing I'd have to a family would be a nine-tailed chakra construct," he said, his smile faltering. "And most importantly, you might still be alive," he said with a small smile. "Then again, if we had never met, that wouldn't mean much to me, right?" Again, he ran his fingers over the cold stone. The moon was shining a pale light on the gray column, almost making it glow. "I guess in the end I'm thankful for the trouble you've caused me because it's made me who I am and given me family and a reason to live again, but I guess it would be more accurate to say I'm thankful for the sacrifice you made." His fingers fell off and landed next to him. "You may not have given your life willingly, but you didn't curse me for what I did to you, either. I like to think I was trying to be kind to you in your last moments, giving in to your fantasies as the light faded in your eyes, but in the end I know it was you who showed the most kindness that night. If you hadn't been so accepting and forgiving, I don't know who I'd be today, and I'm not sure I would have been brave enough to make the wolves my family." A deep sigh came out of his mouth. "But now I'm standing in front of you, ready to fight your family again. I wonder what you must think of me. Do you look down on me and feel bad that we ever met? Do you hate me because I once brought your clan to its knees, ruined its reputation, and left them barely able to pay their bills?" There was no answer. It was just quiet as night fell. "I guess I'll never know, or maybe you won't be able to hate me when you're dead. Either way, I hope you'd be able to forgive me for what I've done and what I'm willing to do, even if I look at what my actions have led to and can't find it in me to feel bad about them. If I could do it all over again, I don't think I'd change a thing. For that, I ask for your forgiveness more than anything else." He let out a light, bitter laugh. "I think I've finally moved on from you, Tatsuki. I think I've accepted your death and the part one played in it. And that," he finally said, "probably more than anything else scares me. Because now I risk going through it all over again." He would be the first to say that didn't go so well. He shouldn't be surprised, because he went in quickly and half-heartedly, and he really did expect something to happen. He had, of course, forgotten about his own situation and how much it really limited him and his ability to take care of his family. He was in a bind and tried to make a plan right away, even though it wasn't fully formed. By the gods, he had made the same mistakes that Kushina was making. He should have known better than to trust her, since she had taken over his clan and talked to him almost every day about legal matters that were still being worked out. He saw the woman and what she was turning into as her desperation gripped her more and more each day. But he had done the same thing she was doing, the thing that was causing her to fail over and over again. If he was being honest, he was kind of sick of himself. She had been a good kunoichi, a great woman, and a loving mother, but now that her family was getting farther away every day, she was almost broken. And if he didn't watch out, he might end up doing the same thing. He really wanted to avoid doing that, thank you. He was just as desperate as she was, and in a way, he was losing his family. In the end, they weren't that different, and he had to wonder if it wasn't his extensive training and experience with the human mind that set him apart. Would she be better off if she went to school? If he weren't, would he be the same as she? Even though they had been through some hard times recently, that thought alone made him very happy to be a Yamanaka. But he didn't like feeling helpless when it came to his clan and what he could do to them. He could talk for hours and hours, and he did. But in the end, he couldn't do much more than make people feel sorry for his clan. And that didn't mean much at all. He knew that Sume wasn't happy with him. Even if she hadn't had anything to do that day, he still took it all from her. Based on how her anger grew with each passing hour, it was likely that she did have things to do. No one would like that, even if it got the job done. In this case, it did not, and he was sure that would only make her madder. He would have to wait about a month before trying again, but at least that would give him more time to plan. He just hoped it would happen soon enough to keep his clan from having to deal with the wolves again. Even though this was his original plan, he hadn't planned to send spies to the wolves' new country when he first thought of joining forces with a common ally to gain favor with the wolves. Even though the information was helpful, it was clear that it was a bad idea. A Kushina-level idea. If nothing else, he hoped that Naruto and the wolves would blame him and leave the clan alone. Or, if he was completely honest about what he really wanted, he would ask that they spare Ino's life. During that dinner, Kushina might have been onto something. If they got married, it would protect the clan and, more importantly, his precious daughter. Of course, now he really did sound like Kushina, and his plan was so similar to hers that it could have been hers. Just that it didn't seem like such a bad idea anymore, which probably wasn't a good sign. Was he actually becoming another Kushina? He was almost sick at the thought. Before she left, he wouldn't have cared if people compared him to her. In fact, he probably would have thought it was a compliment. Now, though, he couldn't think of a worse insult, and he really hoped she could get back to what she used to be before that Kushina, the one so many people looked up to and admired, was gone for good. Time would have to tell. Still, he had a hard time accepting how stupid he had been, both with Sume and when he sent spies into Nami no Kuni. He just knew that at least one of them, and probably both, would come back to bite him later. He ended up approaching the compound from the northeast, on a path that went through the clan cemetery and led to the home of the clan head. It was almost as if the gods agreed and were eager to get started. He didn't live there anymore because he and his wife moved into a guest house so that his daughter could feel more like the clan head as part of her punishment and life lesson. However, the guest house was the closest building to the head home. So, the path through the cemetery didn't seem like such a bad idea. When he realized that some of his recent ideas were too similar to Kushina's for his comfort, that should have been a warning sign for him. He didn't see the link, which is too bad. It was probably the shortest way, gave him a little extra time, and brought him close to where his sister was buried. If that was the case, it seemed like a good idea to pay them a visit. On his way back home, that was his second mistake. When he stopped walking and didn't run away when he saw someone else near her grave, that was his third. As if his red hair wasn't enough to tell him apart, the young man turned to face the newcomer with purple eyes that were strangely quiet. There was a moment of burning anger, but it didn't last long. It was quickly replaced by a calm indifference that, while lordly, didn't seem to fit the young man. Or, more accurately, it fit him well, maybe even too well, but it wasn't what he had learned from the leader of the wolves. If he had known less, he might have thought to wonder what could have happened to the boy. He knew very well what could have caused the thing that stood in front of his sister's grave. He was to blame because of it. So, the question was, how much did Naruto really know? Ino, he said the last word slowly, as if time itself had slowed down because of how calm he seemed. Even though it was quiet, it was very scary. One that fit someone who led an army of scary things, he had to admit. Ichi. The young man let out a light laugh that should have been warm and pleasant but was anything but. He said, "How convenient. I was on my way to find you," he said. His eyes, which still hid the anger he had felt before, got noticeably harder, and the neutrally drawn lines on his lips turned into a frown. "We really need to talk." Inoichi never wanted to hear those words, but since he knew what they meant, they sounded more like a death bell. He wasn't so lucky that all of this was just a coincidence, but if Lady Fortune liked him enough, he might be able to get out of this. And if he did, well, he would definitely make sure that she got a proper thank you gift. "Oh, is there anything I or the Yamanaka clan can help you with?" he asked. He was very careful not to say anything about a problem, so the boy wouldn't think there was something wrong. He might not be lucky enough for all of this to be a coincidence, but he didn't need to try his luck. He didn't want to tempt fate like the Hyuga did. "Yes, I think there is," Naruto said. He turned away from the grave and looked over at the clan head, almost as if the way he looked could tell him everything he needed to know. "Tell me, Inoichi," said the Mindwalker. He tried to ignore the sweat forming on the back of his head by using his training as a Yamanaka to keep his face as calm as possible. "Has anyone been making you sad lately?" "Missing." Before he said what he wanted to say, he went to ask for more information. The chance had come could it have been planned, and he planned to use it to his advantage if he could. There was, of course, always the chance that Naruto was saying things the way he was in the hopes that Sasuke would see the way out and admit guilt. It might have caught someone else. It almost caught him when he was Kureta, but Yamanaka was able to avoid it, even if just barely. That is, if he was trying to avoid something in the first place, he might just be crazy. He was a shinobi, so there's no question that he was worried. He could just be acting a little too paranoid right now and overthinking things, which could be just as bad as not thinking at all. He kept explaining his question as if he wasn't sure what Naruto was asking. As in wanting to see them. It wasn't a stupid question, since the young man was still between him and his sister's grave. It should be easy to see how he came to this conclusion. He didn't talk about his lost sister, though, because that was a touchy subject for both of them. He had already said that he wasn't going to try his luck, and he wasn't stupid enough to do so. Fortune and fate could both be just as cruel as wives. Naruto had a good sense of things, which helped him in this situation. His quick glance in the direction of where his sister would be buried was almost unintentional, but Naruto saw it well enough. It would make him think that Inoichi really didn't know what was being asked of him. Naruto said, "No," his voice got softer, but it was still as slow as before. Maybe the young man did buy it in the end. "I was wondering if any of your clan members might have gone missing." Inoichi's first thought was to say that 3 shinobi were missing, but he stopped himself before he could say anything. That would have been the easiest way for him to make a mistake. For all the subtlety of his question, he might as well have asked if Naruto had found them. The last spy got away, and the body of the other spy was destroyed before he could be found. Naruto should have known that there was only one Yamanaka in that group for sure. If Inoichi got his way, things would stay the same. Unless Naruto had access to the clan registry, which he might have, and had checked it against all the people in Konoha and any missions that were going on at the time, which he didn't think the young man could do. Even so, he should be safe then. There was a risk, but it was very small compared to the trouble he could get into. Actually, now that you mention it, I think I heard someone say the other day that they couldn't find Yatsura, and I've been hearing complaints that he hasn't been at his guard shift for the past 2 days. Is that true? How? Naruto paused, looking completely uninterested and almost accusing at the same time. Interesting. Inoichi's head had a single drop of sweat, and he wondered if he'd gotten away with what he'd done. The only spy who had been successful would have to go away. He could have been set up as close as Tanzaku Gai, but now that the other 2 were dead, the chances of being found had gone down by a factor of 10. Something for which he was very thankful. It looks like he decided to take a short vacation and ended up running into some of the local wildlife. The word wolves wasn't said, but it was clear. I'm sorry to say that he is no longer alive. He didn't seem like that at all. In fact, if Inoichi hadn't known the truth, he might have thought for sure that the young man in front of him had killed the man himself. That's too bad. I'll let his friends know about it. No family? He laughed a little, and Inoichi felt like he was about to lose it. That was a mistake, and it was a very bad mistake. Even though it was small, would it be enough to show that he was guilty? No, the leader wolf mumbled. He looked right into the Mindwalker's eyes and said, "Of course there isn't any close family. It's only natural." Your friend was in the wrong place for sure, and he paid for it. Naruto's long strides quickly filled the space between them. His moves were smooth and elegant, but they also had a power that was surprising for someone so young. I think you should keep a closer eye on your clanmates, Inoichi. It would be a shame if more of them wandered into the territory of dangerous animals. Thanks for your advice, Naruto-san. I'll think about what you said. Naruto kept staring at him for a few more seconds, even though they were only a few feet apart, before giving him a small nod. Make sure you do, he said, and then he sped past the Yamanaka's head and stopped a few feet away. He called back, an Inoichi, but didn't turn around to face the person he was talking to. Yes. If I find out that you put him in the wrong place, we will eat you. He turned his head just enough to look into the eyes of the taller blonde. And as mad as I am, that might be a literal statement. When he was done, he left again, fading into the early night, leaving Inoichi to stand there and look at him in horror. He felt a chill go down his back, and his stomach began to churn. There were many ways to send a message, and the way you chose to do it usually depended on what you wanted to say. But to really eat your enemy. There were many ways to understand that message, but Inoichi knew that the point wasn't to send a message. No, they weren't trying to show that they were higher on the food chain than them or that they were cruel. They would eat him because he was just flesh to them. And what does it matter to a wolf what the hot meat it eats is called? This was not a message. It was a threat, a promise that if he was the one who hurt the pack, he would be used to feed the pack. It made sense, or it would if they were really wolves. But maybe, just maybe, they weren't quite people either, even if they weren't wolves. And that thought was going to keep him up all night. He woke up that morning not because the sun was shining brightly, but because his guard, who was tightly wrapped in his arms, moved around and her soft voice woke him up. At least at first, the voice wasn't talking to him. Instead, it was talking to someone else in his room. That meant either Mai or one of his other guards. Given that the voice sounded like a man's, it probably wasn't Mai. Whatever they were talking about was over, and he heard the door close in the background. Unfortunately, that didn't mean that he could go back to sleep. The person he was holding turned around to face him, and he ran his fingers along his cheek. They hushed. Naruto-sama, you have a guest. He didn't answer because he wanted them to let him sleep, but that didn't work out too well. I know you're not sleeping, Naruto-sama, she said in a voice that was both serious and funny. He was sure that if he opened his eyes, he would see a smile. He grumbled, no thanks to you, and still didn't open his eyes. Whoever is here can wait a bit. They can't be too important, or they would know not to come this early unless it was an emergency. He could hear her laugh as she said, early? Naruto-sama, it's getting close to 11. Oh, was it already that late? Damn. He shouldn't have been too surprised. He didn't get to bed until early this morning because he was too busy reading Mai's reports and was too angry about his lost children to hope to sleep at a normal time. He finally calmed down enough to go to sleep around 4, which helped get rid of most of the anger he still felt. He was still angry, but the cold fury, which was a burning rage that he kept under control by sheer determination alone, had run its course. Even though he didn't know the people who had died, he felt a little empty and a little pain in his chest. Because, whether he was close to them or not, he was responsible for them. He had let them down. But even though he was sad about their death, he wasn't going to let it get him down. Instead, he would use it to push himself to greater heights so he could stop a similar tragedy from happening again. He knew he wouldn't succeed at first and that he would keep losing wolves, but each time he lost, he was determined to do better than the last time. This thought helped him let go of his anger, which would have kept him from being the leader his children needed. But telling Inoichi that they would eat him had also helped. Still, he hadn't been sleeping for an unusually long time, so everything else could wait. He asked, so? As he pulled her closer to him and slowed his breathing to get ready to go back to sleep. It's the goddess, she needs to talk to you, was his answer, and he didn't even hesitate. He said, which one? Hinata or Makoto? Hinata or Makoto? Ah, yes, she doesn't know anything about Makoto, does she? She was in his group when she visited, but her name wasn't mentioned. She wore a mask to hide her identity when she got out of and into his carriage. Don't you mean Hinata no Makoto? No, Makoto or Hinata. There are two. Oh. She stopped for a moment because she hadn't expected that, but she quickly started talking again. Well, it looks like Hinata no Makoto has come to see us. Why can't she just come with us now? We can talk about it later. Come with us. She's about 12. At that, he opened one eye and raised one eyebrow. You know I'm 12 too, right? Her blush of embarrassment made it worth his while to move his eyelids. I'm sorry, Naruto-sama. Sometimes it's so easy to forget, she said after a moment of silence. Did you still want me to invite her to sleep in your bed? Naruto blinked a few times while he thought about what she said. They just sounded so dirty, even though they were being polite. If he thought about it, it was like hearing a polite Anko. And the idea of something like that was just too strange for him. No, he muttered. No problem, I'll get up. He was thinking about Anko, so he half expected his current friend to say something about being able to help him get up. Instead, she just nodded and quickly got out of the room by slipping out of his bed. He didn't say anything about how her uniform was still on the floor. He groaned as he got out of bed and thought about putting on a shirt before deciding not to bother. He was not yet ready for the day, so he hoped that his wolf had gone to start some coffee. As he walked out of the room, he stretched and went to the kitchen. He was glad to see that she was, in fact, making coffee. He smiled at the former Hyuga heiress sitting across from him as he took a seat at his table. After a mug was put in front of him and he took his first delicious sip, he turned his full attention to the young woman who had come to see him at the godforsaken hour of 11. He thought that, other than the size of her blush, there wasn't much different about her. He didn't know if it was because he didn't have a shirt on or because the half-naked woman had come back to his room to get her clothes. He also couldn't care. So, Hinata, he broke the silence with his voice. You needed to see me? Yes, I was told to invite you to the compound, she said. An invite to the compound? He asked with a raised brow. What's the point? Hiyashi-sama never thanked you properly for defending the clan's pride. Come again? Trying to defend the clan? When did that happen? She helped out by saying, when you stop Ino from pushing me around.
Oh, yeah, it could be seen that way, he thought, but they were going to thank him for it. How late is it? He had to wonder why they'd have been of course. Wasn't it really more of an excuse than anything else? Just a chance to talk to him. Well, he wasn't against it. So they want me to come visit sometime.
She said, tea tonight, if you're available. Hiyashi-sama was going to have you over for dinner. Oh, I see. I guess I should tell Mai and try to find something to wear. Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Hinata, and please let your father know I'll be there. Of course, Naruto-san, she says, and her face turns red again, this time out of fear. Oh, I'm sorry, Naruto-sama. I'll let him know. He waved her away like he didn't care. People just knew how to talk to him because he never told anyone how he wanted to be called. Don't worry about it, it's fine. You can call me whatever you want. She nodded to show that she agreed, but she wasn't going to tell him that she liked calling him Naruto-sama. Plus, he had just told her she could do it, hadn't he? He walked down the street whistling a happy tune with one hand in his pocket and the other holding his favorite book open. He didn't go out much when he didn't have to because he liked being alone in his apartment, but he heard the most interesting news last night. It looked like the wolves were going to be out and about in Konoha. He thought they were already here based on what he had heard. In his buka, not his real book, but the one that was a figure of speech, he would never risk putting anything personal in Jiraiya-sama's beautiful writing, which was a good thing. Something very good. Because that meant that all he had to do to find Naruto, who had been getting harder and harder to find lately, was to find a wolf and ask for directions. What a good thing. Even though he didn't know for sure that Naruto was Tsukiyomi or even that he was part of the wolves, he thought this would be a great chance to find out. He would have liked to have just asked Tsunami, who should have met with him, but he hadn't been able to go back to see the beauty yet. He had been told that it was not a good idea to leave so soon after a mission that went on longer than it was supposed to without permission or even notice. Or at least that's how the Hokage put it. What he really said was, so help me, if you do anything like this again, I swear to the gods above that I will personally castrate you and shove your manhood so far up your ass that you'll fucking choke. He liked the translation better than the original. It was a waste of time to tiptoe around. It was better to just say what was on your mind to make sure the message was heard and understood. Aside from that, the only thing he didn't like about what the Hokage really meant to say was that he thought his whole manhood would fit up his rectum before he started to choke on it. After all, he was Kakashi making out with Hitaki. When he died, horses cried because they felt ashamed. Or at least that's what he liked to think. Tsunami didn't disagree with him, and neither did anyone else he ever slept with. If he said so himself, that was a pretty good sign that he wasn't full of himself. but he probably would be if he upset the Hokage again. That wasn't the best thing to think about. Putting it out of his mind with thoughts of Tsunami's great behind and all the fun they had, he went on his way, occasionally lifting his one eye from his book to look around for wolves. He wasn't really trying that hard to find them, since he knew he'd run into one eventually, but he was looking for him. The problem was that no matter how many times he read his book, 1790, but who's counting, was just as good as when the author's student gave it to him. He probably made the best choice of his life when he chose to read it. No, make it good enough. Without a doubt, the Tsunami came in first. Anyway, he left his apartment, or rather, he didn't go back to his apartment right away after sending his students home from a half-assed training session, because he wanted to find a wolf. He did, to be honest. Icha had too much control over him, though. Not that he was upset about it. Still, he was a little annoyed that he wasn't achieving the goal he set out to. It wasn't much, but it was enough to matter. He could either go home and read, or he could put his book away and look for his targets. Kakashi being Kakashi, he chose the third option and kept doing what he was doing while thinking of ways to get back at his students during tomorrow's training for making him so angry. 3 unlucky genin all over Konoha shivered with fear at the same time for reasons they didn't want to think about. He avoided the crowds around him with skill and wondered what Naruto had been doing. You know, besides running a mercenary group right under the noses of most of Konoha. He had never been close to the kid because he was always busy with his Anbu work. Now that he was a sensei with a lot of free time, the boy was busy taking over countries and joining imperial courts. He had heard that Yugo would train him while he was still in the academy. Maybe they would spar or do something else. They could also go to a bar, where the younger man could act as his wingman. No, I don't think that was a good idea. He thought, though, that he could be Naruto's sidekick. It could work. Then again, maybe that was too much since they had only seen each other on the street a few times before. He would have to start out somewhere less extreme, like a strip club. He didn't know, did he, how innocent Naruto was. Anko followed him around, but he wasn't sure if she had shown him the light or how much light she had shown him. Maybe we should start from the beginning. Okay, he wasn't giving the talk at the beginning, but the next step. Icha. He could give the boy his first Icha, just like how his sensei gave him his first Icha. It would be a good way for the boy to spend time with his friends. Now, was it too much to hire 2 prostitutes to act out scenes? Yeah, I bet it was. Then just one of them should read it to them both. Of course, naked. Inuzuka Kiba thought of himself as a pretty easygoing guy. He was active, but didn't let much bother him. If you insulted him, he was just as likely to laugh at you as to punch him in the face. The thought that his mother might have a lover, on the other hand, really bothered him. He didn't act like he didn't know what sex was or how his mother could have been lonely for so long, but it was his mother. It just felt wrong to think that someone was sleeping with her. If she had gotten married again, it might have been easier for him to accept. After all, it's normal for married people to sleep together. Some of the things they might do in that bed would be easy to forget. In this case, the problem was that he had never even met the jerk. Someone was sleeping with his mother in his house, and he didn't know who it was in the slightest. His mother had always been very open and honest, so the fact that she was doing this behind his back made him suspicious. If she hadn't been in a good mood lately, he might have thought she was being blackmailed or otherwise forced into the situation. However, she seemed happy with whatever secret plan she had. Well, at least until yesterday. She wasn't happy when he came back for dinner, but he stopped thinking it was because of her mysterious lover when she started complaining about Ino's father, Inoichi. She was usually irritated, but this was worse than any other time, even when he had done something really stupid. So, he was pretty sure that her bad mood had nothing to do with her secret lover. Instead, he thought it was probably because she hadn't been able to see him because she was in a very long meeting with the Yamanaka head. Was she maybe getting closer to the person she liked? Couldn't this just be a one-night stand? Even though he found it strange that she would still be there in the future, it was just as comforting to know that his mother would be stable. And then there was the third part, which he wasn't sure about. If this was going to be a permanent thing, would he be meeting the fucker? It would make him feel better to be able to put a face to her lover and find him if he hurt her, but if they were important enough to her that she wanted to introduce him to her family, would he be able to stop himself from hitting him? He cursed in his mind, which was a habit he picked up from being on Kurenai's team and living with 2 women who had very good hearing. They might not have cared as much as his sensei, but you couldn't whisper anything when those two could probably hear a butterfly flapping its wings. Or, at least, they could if you said something bad about them. This would be a lot easier if he didn't know what his mother was doing while he was out training. At first, he didn't think much of the fact that she was wearing pants again before noon. After all, he only saw her briefly when he had to run home to get something. At the time, it didn't seem important that she wasn't lounging on the couch or sitting in her bathrobe at her desk. Then the dishes came. Even though he didn't do the dishes very often, he knew when there were more dirty dishes than a family of 3 should have, especially since he was only here for 2 meals and his sister was usually only here for 1. Someone had been there, which was easy to see. It could have been an old friend stopping by for a visit, or it could have been a meeting between clan leaders. But as the extra dishes happened more often and his mother stopped wearing pants all the time, he started to think something was wrong. Hannah was out doing something for the clan, which he would usually know about as the head son, and he spent most of his time training and going on missions with his team, so the house was mostly empty for most of the day. And that made him realize that his mother was the only one living in the house since he had gone to school. Only his mother and whoever was visiting her at the time. When the connection was made, things started to make a little more sense. She got her work done faster and was in a better mood. A few times, she even forgot to put food in the fridge because she was out with friends. She never got together with her friends. He cursed himself for being so blind back then, and he cursed himself again for deciding to start seeing what was really going on now. He had to face the fact that some jerk had been going out with his mom regularly for who knows how long. But there wasn't much left to do, was there? He wasn't going to try to stop her from having a lover because he knew it wasn't good for his health. He would tell him where he belonged, but he would let his mother make her own choices. Unless she was getting with Hyuga Hiyashi, that's where he drew the line. The man was a huge ass and his mother deserved better. The fact that he liked Hinata, who very well might become his sister-in-law in that situation, had nothing to do with his adverseness to it. No, not at all. Seriously. Okay, maybe a little bit. She was a woman on a mission, or so she liked to think, sneaking her way to her target to fulfill her objective. She paid no mind to all who stared at her, ranging anywhere from veteran Anbu to the most unaware civilian child. As far as she was concerned, not a single one actually saw her as she dived from roof to roof. She was a ninja akunoichi, specifically, and that meant she was sneaky even when she wasn't trying to be sneaky. This wasn't really the case, but no one was about to break it to her. Slipping through the shadows which weren't really there, considering she was out in the open and was bathed in the bright glow of Hai no Kuni's afternoon sun, she was like a whisper of the wind, a whisper of rather loud expletives as she tripped over another potted plant hidden just beyond the wall of a rooftop garden. It didn't matter though, even her cursing was sneaky. Nearby Anbu, watching her in amusement and shaking their heads in mirth, wouldn't quite agree, but neither were they foolish enough to voice their opinions to the woman. She could be damn scary when you pissed her off. Well, she could be damn scary when she liked you, too, so it was probably safest to say the woman was damn scary and pissing her off simply made her downright terrifying. They liked their balls just where they were, thank you. Amused, and more than a bit confused as to what exactly she was doing, they watched as she vaulted over a small wall and onto the streets below. Out of view, she slipped into an alleyway, completely hidden from everyone including the civilian shopkeep who had been putting out the trash. Brushing past the oblivious man, one who was more than happy to watch as she walked away, she continued to her destination with utmost confidence in her ability to complete her self-given mission. She paused behind a crate, one that barely came up to her knees, as she neared the location of her mark. Ignoring the fact that even crouched her cover did almost nothing to hide her from view, she scoped out the surrounding area. The position was well enough defended for having been designed as a civilian dwelling, she supposed. There were guards posted in ways that kept regular citizens from taking note but ensured anyone with training would be able to see them. It was a warning of sorts, security that could work simply by dissuading anyone who might try anything. Unfortunately for them and fortunately for her, it made them easy to locate so she could find some way to avoid them. Even now they had no idea she was there, watching and waiting to slip past them and get to the one protected inside like the chewy center of a hard candy. She pointedly ignored the polite clearing of a throat behind her as one of the very guards she was trying to avoid attempted to get her attention. Digging through one of her pouches, curse her lack of pockets, she retrieved her key quite literally to get in. With a quick look in every direction but behind her where there was still a guard she was ignoring, she dashed from her cover into the main and only door to the residence. With deft fingers she quickly broke in by using the key so thoughtfully given to her and closed the door behind her. She caught her breath as she leaned against the door, hoping she hadn't been seen by any of the guards. When they didn't come, still trying to figure out exactly what it was she was doing, she gave a sigh of relief. Remembering her objective, she dropped to a crouch, her weight resting on the balls of her feet as she began creeping through the small apartment. She made no noise except for when she dropped her key and slunk through the main room like death herself. The bedroom was the first place she went, but her target wasn't there. A pout fell over her lips. She had really hoped they would be in here. Turning back, she made for the kitchen. They weren't even trying to be quiet as they moved about, which begged the question, why hadn't she heard them while passing through the main room? Which meant she could still complete her mission. Dishes clinked in the sink as footsteps drew closer. Retreating back to the bedroom, she slipped into the doorway to hide herself from sight. When they exited the kitchen, she would strike, her target completely unaware. Tile, tile, tile carpet. They were in the main room. With a mighty battle cry of surprise attack, she launched herself from the bedroom to tackle her target. With a pleased grin, she looked down at her fallen foe currently smothered between her breasts, but it quickly melted from her face, replaced once more with a pout. Black hair? Her target didn't have black hair. Oh, it's you. The young woman under her hadn't looked too pleased when she was brought down to the floor, but her comment certainly didn't improve that. As she sat up, releasing her victim from the weight of her breasts, it was easy to see the frown on her face. Well, it's nice to see you too, Mitarashi-san, she said dryly. Anko just rubbed the back of her head as a nervous laugh escaped her lips. Sorry, I was just hoping for Naruto-kun. I heard he returned recently. Where did you know? Wait, never mind. I don't really care how you found out. So what? Asked Mai. Where is he? He just left to have dinner with Hinata-san and her family. What? He went to see her first, not the great and sexy Mitarashi Anko. She crossed her arms and huffed in annoyance. That's bullshit. Her tone still dry and her body still pinned by the Tokubetsu Junin, Mai blandly commented, quite. And thus Operation Welcome Naruto-kun back by crushing him with my boobs and making him treat me to dango ended in failure. If Mai hadn't seemed so irritated at her, she may have tried to salvage it with Operation Pounce on Mai and make her treat me to dango. But she doubted it would work. Say, Maya, but she tried it anyway.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.